welcome to History on Blast, Episode 3, Field Marshal Big Bird? In today's episode, we're putting Sir George Pearce and the entire Australian government on blast. But first, this month in history. On June 29th, 1613, a brand new play about King Henry VIII was showing in London. You know, King Henry VIII. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Yeah, that guy. During the performance, a cannon was fired to highlight the entrance of the actor playing the titular king, and like many other theaters in history, the place caught on fire. The thatched roof in particular. This theater was the Globe Theater, and the play was reportedly named All Is True. But some people think it was later renamed Henry VIII because Shakespeare's histories are just like that. Amazingly, the reports from the era say that no one was hurt, although one guy caught his pants on fire and put it out with a bottle of ale, which is sort of wild to me because isn't alcohol flammable? But hey, you do you, dude. By 1614, they had rebuilt the theater, which they called the Globe Theater 2. Creative, I guess. And now, back to Australia. So, in the aftermath of World War I, approximately 5,000 veterans of the Australian Army were granted land as part of their reward for service. The government arranged for farms for all of these veterans, with several of them moving to the Perth region of Western Australia. Which, man, I'm not even sure what's out there now. I mean, I'm sure there's towns, like Perth is a city, but I'm pretty sure there's also like a meme about how Western Australia is not real. So, who knows? But anyway, so all of these farmers move out to Western Australia, which really most of what's there at this point is the emu. So, what's an emu, you ask? An emu is a large, flightless, fast-running Australian bird resembling the ostrich, with shaggy gray or brown plumage, bare blue skin on the head and neck, and three-toed feet. Basically, it's a velociraptor. Well, okay, not actually a velociraptor. Picture, like, Jurassic Park 3 velociraptors. I think that's the one where they got the feathers. There's a whole rant in here about the velociraptors in Jurassic Park actually being Utah raptors, more accurately, that, you know, a velociraptor is basically a fucking angry chicken, and the ones in the movie are Utah raptors. Not important, but important. So, in 1922, the emu went from being a protected species to being declared vermin for their, let's call it, really annoying habit of destroying all of the farmland in their path. And being a migratory, flightless bird, their path is pretty big. Most of Western Australia, actually. I think you might be getting to see where the problem is. So as these farmers move into Western Australia, they are contending with emus and dingoes and all kinds of problems. And then in 1929, we get the Great Depression. So now all of the wheat that they're growing is effectively worthless. I mean, assuming that they could get any wheat to grow because it's being destroyed by emus. So not even do you have no livelihood because the economy sucks, but you can't even pretend that you're farming anything because emus ate it all. So after sending a lot of strongly worded letters to the Australian government, the government finally decided to make a token effort at pretending to support the farmers. Because if they had actually wanted to support the farmers, it wouldn't have been too hard. They could have handled it with economic aid, subsidies, any kinds of things. What they decided to do in 1932 was to send Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery and approximately 4 guys with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition out to Western Australia to just go fucking hunt some emus. And I know what you're thinking. Lewis machine guns to hunt birds? Isn't that a little bit like overkill? The first battle of the Emu War, as it has been colloquially known, took place on November 2nd of 1932. And on that day, very few emus were actually killed. In fact, most of the birds ran away unharmed. On the second day, they decided to try an ambush instead, thinking, well, I guess we can't just spray and pray. Let's try tactics. Unfortunately for them, the emus were apparently smarter than Australia's finest, and less than a dozen emus were killed when they ambushed close to 1,000. Now, to fully get the image of the nightmare scenario that's running around in Western Australia in 1932, you need to understand that these approximately 4 dudes with 2 machine guns are up against 20,000 migratory emus. And on day 2, they've managed to kill maybe 10. Maybe. So, that's cool. They then decided to try a mobile approach. Maybe it's just that the emus are too fast. Maybe a stationary machine gun isn't cutting it. So they mounted the machine guns into trucks. Sounds cool, right? Well, alright, here's the thing. You're off-roading with these things, and this is 1930s truck technology. I don't think they would know what a shock absorber was if it bit them. So you're trying to aim a machine gun in the back of a truck that is bouncing up and down the entire way. Like, you might as well be trying to line up a shot on a pogo stick. So once again, they didn't really manage to kill any emus. There's actually a pretty entertaining quote from our Major G.P.W. Meredith, who said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." Which, wow. So they started this campaign on November 2nd. By November 8th, they had spent 2,500 rounds of ammunition and killed a grand total of 200 emus. Well, if you do the math, that's about 10 bullets per emu, which, holy shit, that's not economical. After about a month, the Australian government pulled the plug, and the Emu War was over. The emus won. Now, this wouldn't really stand because after this point, the government's response was to put a bounty on emus and arm the farmers who, if you'll remember, were veterans of the First World War, so they know how to handle a gun. You'd think that the soldiers with the machine guns would too, but I mean, whatever. So, why is this important to talk about? Aside from it being really funny, I mean, you have to think about a standing army from a sovereign nation, a jewel in the crown of the British Empire, just lost a war to Big Bird. But it's also a really fascinating thing to look at, because what you have to remember is that the entire point of this was the Australian government trying to pretend that they were helping these veteran farmers in Western Australia who had basically lost their livelihood to a combination of economic depression and ravaging beast. And then in their little propaganda coup to try to pretend that they were doing anything, they lost. And then in their backup plan, all right, let's just throw a bounty on emus and arm the farmers and see what happens. That's when most of the emus were actually eradicated, and the farmers got the support they needed in the form of the bounties being paid per emu. These days, emus aren't nearly as much of a problem because they've installed these very large fences, which also serve to halt the migration of rabbits, which are a whole different problem that were, imported. Rabbits aren't native to Australia. I'm looking at you, England. Now, you may be wondering who Sir George Pearce is in all of this. He was the Minister of Defense for Australia at this point in time. Now, one of the things to remember is that this was ostensibly a farming issue. So they shouldn't have actually been going through the Minister of Defense. They should have been going through the Minister of Agriculture. But because the farmers in Western Australia were largely veterans of the First World War, they trusted the Minister of Defense more than they trusted the Minister of Agriculture, which is how we end up with an agricultural issue being solved ineffectively with machine guns. So thank you for listening to another episode of History on Blast. If you'd like to get in contact with me, you can either send me a message on Twitter at History on Blast, or you can get a hold of me via email at historyonblast@gmail.com. You can use that for suggestions for episodes, or if you have any feedback about the episodes, or if you have questions or comments, anything like that. I would also really appreciate it if you like what you're hearing, if you could just go ahead and leave a review in iTunes. That would be swell, because that'll really help get the show out there. I would also like to say thank you to Defy Them All for the use of their song Keeper of Histories for the intro and outro of our program. And also, thank you.